to the first ever episode of the Trailblazers Insider podcast on Rip City Radio 620 AM. I'm Sean Highkin. I'm the Trailblazers Insider for Rip City Radio. I also run and operate the Rose Garden Report, which is a subscription-based newsletter covering the Trailblazers, which you can subscribe to at rosegardenreport.com for all your comprehensive written coverage of the team. I haven't done a podcast in a long time. I used to have one under the Rose Garden Report banner, but I took a step back from that to focus on other things well over a year ago. But having been the Trailblazers insider for Rip City Radio for last season, the station just renewed their contract with the team for the next several years. And as part of that deal, they were talking about having me do a podcast. And that was also something I kind of wanted to get back into anyway. So here we are. This is going to happen once a week. There's not going to be a set day or time that they come out. It's just going to be kind of whatever makes sense with the schedule, with my schedule, with the news cycle, whatever the case may be. But you're going to get a new episode of this podcast every week. Sometimes it'll be solo like it is now. Sometimes I'm going to have a guest. You can get it on Apple, Spotify, any of the usual places you get podcasts. Listen to it on the iHeartMedia app, which is what I would recommend. And it'll also be on the Rip City Radio YouTube channel. So however you want to get it, audio, video, whatever it is, you're going to have that available to you. I'm also going to start doing a weekly radio show on 6:20 a.m. every Tuesday from 2 to 3 p.m. The Trailblazers Insider Report, which is going to, be kind of sort of an extension of this podcast, sort of different, maybe, some more live interviews, more in-depth stuff, but it's just kind of going to be, another thing that we're adding to the Rip City Radio, roster of Blazers stuff this year. Another way that you can kind of hear me and my coverage of the Trailblazers in radio form. So I'm really excited to get started with all of that. This is the first episode. Obviously, we're recording this on Saturday, the 27th, over the weekend before Media Day, which is Monday on the 29th at 9 a.m. I was going to just kind of have this first episode be a rundown of the off-season, just a recap of everything, because it was a pretty chaotic off-season for the Blazers, starting from the end of the regular season last year when Joe Cronin and Chauncey Billups both got contract extensions. And then a little bit after that, the Paul Allen estate announced finally that the team was going to be put up for sale. And then they drafted Jan Hansen, and the Blazers suddenly became a really popular team in China. There's a ton of attention around him. And it was really exciting at Summer League watching, how well he played and how much, fan and media attention there was around him. And then, they had the DeAndre Ayton buyout, the Anthony Simons-Drew Holiday trade, Damian Lillard coming back, which obviously is maybe the biggest news of everything. And then Tom Dundon's group agreeing to buy the team in August, which is going to close at some point. So I was going to just kind of run through all of that and, go through some stuff that I'm looking forward to in training camp and some stuff I'm going to be watching for. But as tends to happen in the NBA, the news cycle kind of had other ideas. There were two pretty significant news developments this past week in Blazerland that I think we have to talk about. One of them is on the court, one of them is off the court, but they're both pretty significant, I would say, at least in the short term, as far as the state of the franchise. So we'll start with the one that's off the court, just because that's the one that is probably going to be the least, there's going to be the least movement on that in the very near future, because this is just kind of a matter of the courts, and it's not something that anybody actually in the organization right now has any control over. But the Chern family, who are the co-founders of Panda Express and by far the most wealthy investors in the group that Tom Dundon put together to buy the Trailblazers, that's currently pending a Board of Governors vote, they joined his group with the announcement of the formal agreement earlier this month. And there's been a lawsuit that was filed this past week by Raj Sports, which is the parent company of the Bethal family, who own the Portland Thorns and the Portland Fire WNBA expansion team. They're also a minority owner of the Sacramento Kings. And this lawsuit that was just filed this week in the Delaware Court of Chancery is alleging that the Chern family actually had an agreement in place with the Bethals to pursue a bid, and that they had signed a confidentiality and exclusivity agreement that they then violated by going and joining the Tom Dundon group. And basically, just kind of to give you like the most broad strokes, you can go to rosegardenreport.com. I have a couple of different stories I've written about this based on the court documents that have become available. If you want a little bit more in-depth breakdown, frankly, a lot of this stuff is above my pay grade. I'm not a lawyer, but I tried to do what I could to make sense of all of it and all the information that was out there. This is also a situation where all any of us know is what's publicly out there on the record. And uh, as of right now, obviously we're going to keep covering this as it develops, but as of right now, there has not been a legal response from the Chern family, so only the Bethal side of the story is out there publicly right now, and so at some point they're going to file a response, and then they're going to have the hearing, and then the courts are going to decide whatever the courts decide. But just kind of a broad strokes summary of what's going on here. So the Tom Dundon group, Tom Dundon being the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes and is set to be the face of the new Blazers ownership group whenever it officially takes over. They agreed to a sale with the Paul Allen estate on August 13th for $4.25 billion. They had this with a tentative agreement, not legally binding, but it was widely reported, including by me, that this tentative agreement was in place. There were a couple of other investors that were in the group with Tom Dundon. The formal agreement, that's actually a legally binding agreement that's going to be submitted to the league office for a vote by the Board of Governors, was announced about a month later on September 12th. And this was when the Cherning family was first kind of named as one of the partners. They were logical partners for a number of different reasons. Peggy Cherning, the wife of the couple, is a graduate of Oregon State, so there's another group with local ties that, for those of you who are still concerned about the team potentially moving, there's something to maybe ease some of those concerns. And then also the fact that both her and her husband are from China. They both grew up in China or Hong Kong and, are from that area. And obviously they founded Panda Express, which is a huge Chinese restaurant. So they know that market very well. And with the Blazers having just drafted Young Hansen and on the verge of really exploding in popularity there, it made sense that maybe they would want to get involved. So this all seems great. This all makes a lot of sense until this week when this lawsuit, first was filed by the Bethal family. They're claiming breach of contract. And what they're alleging is that on July 24th, before the Paul Allen estate officially decided to go with the Tom Dundon group over there, the Bethals wanted to buy the Blazers, which makes a lot of sense because they own the Thorns. They're owning the WNBA expansion team that's starting up next summer. Why would they not also try to buy the Blazers? They would want to have three teams in one city, and obviously the Blazers and the Fire are going to be sharing an arena. And the Bethals also are minority investors in the Sacramento Kings, so the league office already knows them, knows their finances. They have familiarity with the way the league works at the ownership level. They have a lot of experience there. So they were interested in buying the team. And they recruited the Chernigs, allegedly, and they say in the lawsuit that the Chernigs are long-standing family friends of theirs, to be a part of the group, which the Chernigs wanted to do. And they were negotiating, who was going to invest how much. And according to the lawsuit, on July 24th, the Chernigs signed and agreed to a confidentiality and exclusivity agreement that said that they couldn't be a part of any other group that was trying to buy the Trailblazers. So what the Bethals are saying is that then when the Cherning family later joined the Tom Dundon group, they violated that contract. And basically, they allegedly signed that agreement on July 24th, and then they kept talking about kind of deal points and particulars and all that sort of stuff. And then in late August, allegedly, the Chernings abruptly cut off talks and said, we're not talking about this investment anymore. And the Bethals, according to the lawsuit, kind of looked around and said, and got the idea that maybe they were trying to get in with the Dundon group. And so Alex Bethal called Andrew Chernig directly, allegedly. This is all alleged according to the lawsuit. Again, the Bethal side of the story is the only one that's out there right now. So according to this lawsuit, Alex Bethal called Andrew Chernig directly and said, are you guys involved in the Tom Dundon group? And Andrew Chernig said no, allegedly. And then about a couple weeks later, the Paul Allen estate announced the formal sale agreement, and sure enough, the Chernings were in it. So the Bethals are suing them now, and it's going to go to court at some point. There's going to be a hearing for a temporary restraining order. What the Bethals are seeking to do is to keep the Chernig family. They're not challenging. Just want to be clear about something here. They are not suing the Blazers. They're not suing the Paul Allen estate. They're not suing Jody Allen. They're not suing Vulcan. They're not suing the NBA. They're not suing Tom Dundon. They're not challenging the fact that the Paul Allen estate decided to sell the team to Tom Dundon's group over theirs. They are only suing the Chernik family to keep them from being a part of it because they are claiming that they violated their exclusivity agreement. And so that's they want to get a temporary restraining order. That's going to be the first thing that they're trying to do. That, from what I understand, that trial, that hearing is going to happen at some point in the next few weeks, and then after that, there's going to be an injunction hearing, and then possibly, depending on what gets decided in either of those hearings, the whole thing could go to court, and there's discovery. As far as what it means for the Blazers sale, because you might be sitting here thinking this is just a bunch of billionaires fighting against each other, over, petty grievances and contract stuff. What does this have to do with me, a Blazers fan? Well, the Chernik family, like I said, their net worth is estimated to be over 7.5 billion. They have significantly more money than anybody else involved in either of these bids, and so they're going to be a huge part of this bid. They were going to be a huge part of the Bethals bid. They're going to be a huge part of the Tom Dundon bid assuming it goes through and they're able to be a part of it. So if they are not able to be a part of that group, then either the group falls apart or Tom Dundon is going to have to find somebody else, another investor, to put up what their share of the money was going to be, and then it would go through that way. So I don't, it could take, this whole thing could take like a year to play out, but it's also possible that, the sale closes while the litigation is still ongoing, because if the judge doesn't grant the Bethals their temporary restraining order or their temporary injunction, then theoretically the Chernik family is free to keep, moving forward and being a part of the Tom Dundon ownership group with, with this litigation hanging over their head. And then if it goes to a board of governors vote and they vote to approve it by the 3/4 majority that they have to, and then the sale closes, I don't think, from what I understand, I don't think the judge would really have the power, even if they rule in the Bethals' favor, to unwind a sale that has been closed and has been finalized. So at that point, it would just be a matter of the Chernigs would owe the Bethals some money, and then things would be awkward because the Blazers and the Fire are going to be sharing an arena starting next summer, and then they're going to have to work together in some capacity. And if there's this lawsuit that's kind of still out there or is fresh in people's minds, that's going to be a little bit weird. But it's going to be a few weeks at least before we get any real new developments in this case. And Monday at Media Day, I can't imagine anybody's really going to have much to say about it so far. Every time we've reached out to the Blazers or the Paul Allen estate about it, they've said they're not commenting on this lawsuit because they're not a part of this lawsuit. And Blazers president of business operations, Dwayne Hankins, is scheduled to speak to reporters on Monday, but I would imagine that when he gets asked about it, he's going to say the same thing, which is that he can't comment on it. So that is just out there right now. That is what it is. The courts are going to do what they're going to do. It's obviously, I don't really want to speculate or predict what I think is going to happen, because like I said, I'm not a lawyer. This stuff is way above my pay grade. But this is out there. At some point, we're going to know which direction the judge is ruling in, and then we'll talk about how that's going to affect the Blazers' ongoing sale, if that's going to still let it close before the end of the 2025-26 season like they've been hoping that it would, or if it would get delayed or the group could potentially fall apart. That stuff is all way off in the distance at this point. So we're just kind of, we'll keep covering that as it happens, but there's not going to be any like immediate updates on that for right now. Now to the big news development this week that is actually basketball related and on-court related. The Blazers got some pretty unfortunate news on Friday morning, which is that Scoot Henderson last week suffered a torn left hamstring in a off-season workout at the team's practice facility, which this Obviously, it's unfortunate for everybody. It sucks for Scoot because this was going to be a big year for him coming up. He really started to turn it around and break out the second half of his second season. And by all accounts, he had a great summer. There have been videos on YouTube of him going through runs and drills and stuff with Drew Holiday and with Rajon Rondo was at some of them, and it seemed like everybody was really excited about Scoot's development, but that's all just on pause now. They said in the press release the team did that he is going to return to basketball activities in 4 to 8 weeks. Now, if he returns to basketball activities in 4 weeks from Friday, which is when they made the announcement, that would mean he would miss the first 2 games of the regular season at the end of October. If it's the full 8 weeks, that's the first 16 games of the season, and that's just to return to basketball activities. Remember, when it says he will return to basketball activities in 4 to 8 weeks, that doesn't mean once he's cleared to return to basketball activities, he can play in a game the next day. They're going to obviously be very careful with what he's able to do as far as working out and rehabbing and ramping up during this 4 to 8 weeks. And a hamstring is something that you really just don't want to play around with because that could lead to other things. It could lead to an ACL injury or all this other stuff. It's something you just want to be extra careful with. So once Scoot Henderson is cleared to play, let's say he's cleared to play like in the middle of that timeline. Let's say he's cleared to return to basketball activities in 6 weeks. It'll probably be another couple of weeks once he's cleared to start, scrimmaging and doing contact stuff. It'll probably be another couple of weeks before he's actually cleared to return. So he could be out easily up until Thanksgiving or even into December or into the new year, depending on how long this rehab and this recovery goes. The fact that they're saying that he's going to return in 4 to 8 weeks makes it sound like right now they're not thinking about surgery, but obviously, depending on how the rehab goes, they can't completely rule that out. So this is just a huge bummer for Scoot. This was going to be a huge year for him, and he's going to be extension eligible next offseason, and so the Blazers, I think, were hoping that he would be able to build on the progress that he made the second half of last season and really have a breakout season, and then they would know, how much of a core piece for their future he's going to be. That's all just kind of on the back burner until he's back from that injury. And then you have to think that once he does come back from the injury and starts playing again, he's going to be a little bit rusty, and it's going to take some time for him to mesh with whoever he ends up playing alongside, whether that's Drew Holiday or him and Shaden Sharp actually haven't played a ton together because they've both been injured at different points. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out with Scoot. But in the meantime, Chauncey Billups is still going to have some decisions to make about the starting lineup and some of the rotational stuff. We had kind of been thinking, before this injury happened, obviously, who are going to be the two opening night starting guards? It can only be two of Drew Holiday, Scoot Henderson, or Shaden Sharp. My assumption and just kind of guess had been that it was going to be Drew Holiday and Scoot Henderson, with Drew playing the two. That obviously isn't going to happen at the start of the season now because Scoot is going to miss the start of the season. So you would think it would just be, Drew Holiday at the one, Shaden Sharp at the two, right? Not necessarily. I don't know. Because then there's also some decisions that they would have had to make at the two forwards. But the only starter that I think is fully just penciled in, unless Jan Hansen really just blows people away in training camp and is way more ready than people realize, I think it's pretty safe to pencil in Donovan Clingan as the starting center. But other than that, a lot of this stuff is up in the air. And so, who are the two starting forwards going to be? They're going to be Denny Avdia and Tumani Kamara. Is Jeremy Grant still going to, be in the mix somehow? So, you could see it being, a Drew Holiday, Shaden Sharp, Tumani Kamara, Denny Avdia starting lineup. Or you could also see, it's possible they could decide to go Denny Avdia at the two and then start both Kamara and Grant. So this is all going to be stuff that has to get figured out during training camp. So the Blazers have some decisions to make. As far as in the short term, even besides who starts, obviously, they're losing depth with Scoot being out, and they already, they signed Damian Lillard. He's not going to play this year because he has the torn Achilles. So they already now are kind of thin in the backcourt. And I would guess that, Caleb Love, who they have on a two-way, and Blake Wesley, who they signed to a minimum deal as kind of a guard depth piece, they're going to get more minutes, I think, than was expected previously. So, they can get through this first month or 2 months of the season and be okay. But obviously this is not ideal. This is not what they wanted. This is not what Scoot wanted. This is not really what anybody wanted. So starting off training camp on kind of a down note, and that takes us to Monday, which is media day, and there's going to be a lot to ask a lot of people about. Joe Cronin is going to talk for the first time since the Dame reintroductory press conference. Chauncey Billups is going to talk. Dwayne Hankins is going to talk. Obviously interested to hear from Dwayne what he can and can't share about the sales stuff. I would imagine he probably can't say too much about that since the sale isn't official yet, but there's still going to be kind of some stuff to ask him about, the status of the TV deal and whether it's going to be on YouTube TV. I think it's not, but there are still stuff to talk about with him there. Uh, Obviously, with this Scoot injury now being a factor, I'm going to be very curious to know, outside of Scoot and Dame, who's healthy. Is everybody a full go? I'm curious kind of the vibes around the sale from some of the players. Like, is this something they're paying attention to? Is this something that, Chauncey and his staff are paying attention to or worried about? Obviously nobody can really comment on, Tom Dundon or any of the stuff, but I'm still curious, this stuff's out there. These guys see this stuff just like everybody else. So, I'm curious kind of what the vibes are around the sale. Chauncey Billups has a pretty significantly overhauled coaching staff. We brought in Tiago Splitter, we brought in Patrick St. Andrews, James Posey, Quentin Crawford. So I'm curious what he thinks those guys are going to add because we haven't really talked to him about that yet. Curious how Jan Hansen is acclimating to America. He had that post on the Players Tribune the other day that I would recommend reading if you haven't read it yet. But I'm excited to kind of be around him more and see how he is adjusting to his first real NBA training camp. And then, other than that, the big year coming up for Shaedon Sharpe. He is extension eligible through the first week of the regular season. If I had to guess right now, I don't think they're going to get something done before the deadline, or he might just go to restricted free agency. But this is a huge year for him, so it's going to be interesting to see where his head is at. Donovan Clingan going into year two. What is his conditioning like? What has he worked on the offensive end? We know how great he is defensively, but the offense, I think, is something that's going to have to, come around or improve for him to, really be, a all-star level center as opposed to just a good rotation center. There's a lot to dig into, really, with this team. Really, a lot more, I think, than the last couple of seasons. And in fact, I would say that this is probably the most excited that I've been, even as somebody who's not a fan that roots for the team. This is the most excited I've been about the start of the season, really, in a long time. Because look, think about where everything was a year ago and think about where everything is now. So the 2023-24 season, the first year without Dame, they go 21-61, which is miserable, to watch for you as fans. It's miserable to cover for me as a reporter. But it's not even like a good 21-61 because there are teams that don't win a lot of games that you can still point to and say, well, these young guys got better. There was improvement. There was development. There's good things to look at. There was really none of that with the Blazers that season. They get blown out by 62 different times. And, all their young guys, Scoot, had a pretty rough rookie year. Shaedon Sharpe was injured for a lot of the season. There really wasn't a lot of positives to take away from that summer, or from that season, rather. And then you go into that offseason, they fall back 3 spots in the lottery. They had the 4th worst record. They fall back to 7. So, they had an absolutely terrible season on every level, and they don't get even as good of a lottery pick as they had been hoping for. And then that spring, there's kind of some weird Chauncey Billups Phoenix contract. He was going to the final year of his contract. Nobody really knew if he was going to be back. There were some rumors about him trying to go after other jobs. So that was kind of weird. On draft night, they trade for Denny Avdija, who, good player, but they gave up 2 draft picks, and people were kind of confused about, why are the rebuilding team giving up 2 first-round picks for a player? Like, what are they doing? Does that really make a lot of sense? And then they draft Donovan Clingan, which, good pick, but kind of a chalk pick, kind of expected. Not really a whole lot of intrigue around it. And he looked pretty good at Summer League, but he wasn't like setting the world on fire. And then also, last offseason, they didn't trade Jeremy Grant. They didn't trade Anthony Simons. DeAndre Ayton was kind of still there. They just drafted Klingon. Nobody really kind of knew what the long-term future was there. And then you go into last season, and everybody is it's just kind of like, all right, okay, another year of this. They're gonna probably be bad, and then you just hope for guys to stay healthy, a little bit more development. Maybe they can win the lottery and get Cooper Flag and get lucky, and then they're on the right track. That's where things were at a year ago. So think about where things are at right now. The second half of last season, they go 23-18. They are one of the best defensive teams in the league over that stretch. Suddenly, the team has an identity. They are exciting to watch. They're fun to watch. Joe Cronin and Chauncey Billups, like I said earlier, get contract extensions off of all of that. And so people are feeling like, okay, they've got a good thing going finally. It took them 2 years after they traded Dame, but they've got something going. And then they announced that the team is up for sale, which is something that fans have wanted for 7 years since Paul Allen died. Everybody knew that Jody Allen taking care of the team as the trustee of the state was just like a temporary thing. So they finally announced they were going to sell the team, so people were excited about that. The Anthony Simons Drew Holiday trade, Simons, with Scoot and Shaden there, I think people were wondering whether Simons was a long term fit. That trade, I think, they made because they realized that they needed kind of a veteran presence in the locker room and on the level of a Drew Holiday, and also he defensively was a huge upgrade over Simon, so people were pretty happy about that trade. And then they draft Jan Hansen, which was at first was a huge stunner, but because it was just not on anybody's radar. But you quickly saw how magnetic he was at Summer League. He looked a lot better, I think, than expected at Summer League. And then you just get into his story, and once you get past the novelty of just the surprise of the pick, and you see just like how excited people in China are about it. People are really excited about that. They buy out DeAndre Ayton, so there's a little bit of clarity about the center rotation. And then, by the way, Dame is coming back, and that's something that everybody was really excited about and happy about for both on court reasons. Eventually, once he plays again, which is going to be this year, and off court reasons. And so you just go into this offseason or this training camp, and the thing that's really, the thing that is going to change this season for me over the last couple is I don't know how good the Blazers are going to be. I don't know whether they're a play-in team, a playoff team. I think probably at best they're a play-in team still, just because the West is so deep, and I don't know how good these guys are going to be offensively. But they're going into the season trying to win. Like this is not going to be another year of they're going to probably lose 50, 60 games again, and then you just got to hope they get good luck in the lottery, and then they maybe eventually get a start. Like, that's not the mode that they're in now. Joe Cronin said at Dame's introductory press conference in July that it's winning time now. Like, they made a couple of win now moves in, bringing in Drew Holiday, and they've been talking about how much more ready Young Hansen is than people think. So they are going to go into this season trying to win games and not trying to just play the lottery odds and just hope for development. Like that's been the messaging from the organization. And so there's going to be a reason for most people to actually watch these games now beyond just looking at young guys' development. And that, I think, whether it's successful or not, whether this season goes as well as they thought it would or not, it's just that type of team and that type of season is just so much more enjoyable to watch and to cover. And the games are going to feel like they have stakes because the team is making them feel like they have stakes. And because of that, I'm fired up for this season. I'm all ready to go. So I'm very excited. Media day is this morning. When you hear this probably, and then full steam ahead with training camp, and then the preseason opener in San Francisco on October 8th. I will also be at, and it's off to the races, and I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to doing this podcast and the radio show every week on the Rip City Radio 620 platforms. So again, make sure you're subscribed to the Rose Garden Report at rosegardenreport.com. Make sure you're subscribed to this podcast on whatever platform you're subscribed to. Make sure you're listening to all of our coverage at Rip City Radio on the iHeart app or on 620 AM on the radio. And we will be back on here at least next week.